Guys, Andy House here with Area 51 Motorsports, and this is my story about how I made $125,000 off of one car. So about 7 years ago, I was at a friend of mine's place getting my vehicle worked on, and while I was sitting there, I was thinking, you know what? I really should have got into a different business. I'm bored with this business. And about that time, I got a telephone call from a Detroit number. I answered the phone, and the guy said, "Hey, Andy, this is Camilo. I was given your number by a friend of yours that said you bought Ford GTs." And I said, "I know exactly who you are. I stood in line for 2 hours at the Detroit Ford GT rally to get your autograph." And anyway, he started telling me that he was looking to sell his car, that he had wrecked his car, and he was having trouble getting rid of it due to the accident history. And so, backstory on it, I actually owned his car prior to him owning it and had wholesaled it to another dealer, Marino Performance, out of Florida. And so, Camilo had bought the car and flew out, picked the car up, drove it back. When he got into Detroit, had an accident in the car. At that point, he called the GT guys, and they came and picked the car up, took it to their place, and at that point he decided to take this car and do a signature series. And if you look up CamiloPardo.com, you'll see a signature series cars on there, and this is one of them. And so he did his signature series on it. He started driving the car. I think he had this car longer than any of the other cars he owned, somewhere around 4 years. And so he took the car and was using it for a daily driver. And then he ended up doing a video on YouTube, Petrolicious, and it was Full Circle is what it was called. And so anyway, I think he wanted like $150,000 for this car, and I was like, you know what, let me do some checking, and I'll get back with you on that. And so I called a friend of mine. I said, "Hey, look, got a big opportunity to buy one of Camilo Pardo's cars." And my friend said, "How much?" And I said, 150 grand. He said, "I don't think you'll get your money back out of it with the accident history." And I said, "Well, I think you're wrong. I've got a good plan for how to remarket this car." And I said, "I tell you what, loan me the 125,000 or the 150,000, and let me get this car bought, and I'll split the profits with you." He said, "All right, great, let's do it." And so I called Camilo back, and I said, "Look, I'll take the car." And he said, "Would you wire the money to Ford to pay for my new Ford GT that I have on order?" And I said, "Absolutely." So I wired the money over to Ford, and then I called Camilo back, and I said, "Hey, what do I do about getting the title of this car?" And he said, "I'm out of town. I'm in California." He said, "When I get back, I'll get the title." And I said, "What about signing the car?" And he said, "I haven't signed the car. It'd be kind of ridiculous for me to ride around in my own car that I've signed." And I said, "Well, great. How do we go about doing that?" And he said, "Well, when I fly back, I'll fly into Houston. You can pick me up at the airport. I'll sign the car for you, hand you over the title and all that." And I said, "Great." And so I agreed to fly him in, and he flew into Bush Intercontinental Airport, and a friend of mine and myself picked him up in a Rolls Royce, and we drove him back to Beaumont. We invited a bunch of people over for what we called a last ride. We videoed and photographed all this stuff, and so we took a last ride. We stayed up late, partied all night. Also, he did a bunch of paintings for us, paintings for our friends that were there, and we've become really close friends with him. And so at that point, I took the car and detailed it up, put new tires on it, posted it up for sale, did a posting about the last ride in the Ford GT, and how Camilo, who designed the car for Ford, had also crashed this car and then turned it into his own signature series car. And then at that point, uh, I took the car and posted it up for sale. And I think it was about 2 weeks later, a friend of mine called me up and said, "Hey, what do I do about getting a battery for my Ford GT?" It was a Ford GT that I'd sold him prior. And we discussed that. And then I said, "Hey, did you hear about my Camilo car?" And he said, "Who is Camilo?" And I said, "Camilo is the guy who designed the car for Ford." And he was like, "Oh, no kidding." So I sent him the videos and the video from Petrolicious and all the content I had for the car. And he was like, I've got to have this car. How much? And I think I'd told him like 300 or something. He negotiated back down to about 275. And we ended up making really good friends with Camilo Pardo. He's been back several times. He stayed the night at my house several times. It ends up being a good story because we ended up doing another car together, the chrome car that y'all have seen on my Facebook page before. And we'll discuss that one later as well. But that was my quick story on how I made $125,000 off of one car. And it was the most money I've made off of one car. Thanks. Come back and watch for the next story.